Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Daisy's still reeling over losing Jiang last episode. And the fact of the matter is she's trying to do everything she can to find Simmons, but then Simmons disappears, so it's did they jump? But it's no, they couldn't have jumped. But then it's well, if they're not there, that must mean they went into space, so that's happening. The rest of the team is back, and obviously Daisy wants to tell Cora about their mom because it's if they tell her the truth, then she might be more likely to open up and help them. But Daisy went in guns blazing. Cora's oh, you must be Daisy. She quakes her against the wall. Boom, hand around the throat. Tell me where Nathaniel went. I was yo. Because she, once again, she's in a very emotional state right now, understandably considering everything that went down. But obviously, they kind of get her to kind of back down. And so we find out Cora's whole thing is, oh, I want to be an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is I think it's kind of interesting considering well, your sister also being Inhuman is an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., has been for a while now. So it's almost interesting, but it's okay, so the reasoning is why? Because for her, it's Nathaniel doesn't like any structure. He feels the same way about Hydra, the same way he feels about S.H.I.E.L.D. It's more about what they represent, some people in this position that kind of decide what's right and what's wrong, who get to make these big decisions and stuff like that, that there's a structure. He wants things to kind of be a free will, the chaos, the good, the bad, everything kind of running free and rampant. For her, it's Nathaniel looks at S.H.I.E.L.D. as any other institution, but she's it can be used to eliminate. Especially with time travel, you can, especially given this opportunity, wipe out certain key figures that could change the course of history, in the best way. They're we're not a death squad, but then she's S.H.I.E.L.D. has killed plenty of people, basically. And it's not just obviously referring to the team. Let's not forget, all the people that Nathaniel has saved have all been people that were killed by S.H.I.E.L.D. So obviously S.H.I.E.L.D. has had a long history of killing people that are even the team has kind of, killed people, not necessarily because they wanted to, just kind of the circumstances put them in a situation of, we have to stop this bad guy, regardless of it all, But it's all that saying, so it's would this really be any different than anything else S.H.I.E.L.D. has ever done in its history? But obviously they don't, the history of S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't who they are. It doesn't define who they are. So they're not, the Death Squad type. But it does present this interesting, situation, especially because Sybil, has led her to this point, has led all of them to this point because she's been able to obviously accurately predict everything. So it's if she says we take care of these key people, we can save tons and tons of lives. Look at all these people that Nathaniel saved because of her. You could save more. And so Daisy has a one-on-one conversation with her. And I never really broke it down the way this episode did. And I thought that was so beautifully done. The parallels between their lives. Daisy, all she ever wanted, she grew up without a family. All she ever wanted was to kind of have that family. And you can make, in her mind, it's almost and she, because it's Cora's I'm sorry you had to grow up without a family or knowing mom or having her love. And then Daisy's I'm sorry you threw it all away. So it's a thing of it's that thing of the grass is always greener on the other side, because it's in, Cora's mind, it's Mom, yeah, but I was always a prisoner, Mom, always kept me shackled. I never had freedom. Daisy had freedom but wanted nothing but a family. So it's always the thing is grass is always greener on the other side. You're always oh, your life had is no, my life has its issues. Especially for Daisy, who grew up, in the foster system, going from place to place, this that being S.H.I.E.L.D. being the first family she had her entire life, her first real family. So, so that's an interesting thing. And obviously, Cora suggesting that the two of them working together, it's and she's well, you some super sister superhero team or thing or something, which who knows if that's actually a thing in the comic books or not. Once again, not well versed, but I just thought that was interesting. And it's Sybil said that regardless of it all, that you wouldn't let your sister fight alone. And then Daisy was you're right, and leaves. And it turns out the person she's going to save is Simmons. I thought that was beautiful, because even last season they had I think it was in the episode, it was the second or third episode of the season, last season, they were at that place, and they were kind of drunk or high, and then Simmons and her were oh, you're my best friend, it was a cute, adorable, beautiful moment. And it's just for her to be oh yeah, that's my sister, so that's the sister I'm gonna say. And I love Sousa's kind of whoa, are you going to really go? Like, could you, he's like, I always have to be there for people because I know when people are about to do something really dumb. And she's like, because basically she wants to do something unpredictable. I also do appreciate she kind of suited up because even he was like, well, that's new because she hasn't worn it this season. At least I think the last time she wore it was like probably at the beginning of the season, probably, before they ended up meeting with Dan, because obviously they've been doing a lot of time traveling, so it hasn't been really much need to wear it because you would stick out too much. But nevertheless, it's a situation where he kind of goes with her and she's not too surprised because it's like, yeah, it's you. Because she's like, you always want to help. Maybe this be the one time you don't, but, she accepts his help because this is about being unpredictable. So her thing would be always about, Sybil wants me to save my sister and that's what I'm going to do. Just, it's not going to be the sister I don't know, that being Cora. This is going to be the sister I know in Simmons. And Daniel has never been the type to kind of abandon his post and just kind of like cut loose a little bit. And you could look at this as an opportunity for that. And Mac is like, so you're just going to leave your sister and everything? And she's like, no. Well, actually, she's like, yeah, this is actually happening, but still. And Mac's like, all right, let's go before I end up changing my mind, Because even he was talking about, being unpredictable. I even love Coulson being like, oh, yeah, like a director of S.H.I.E.L.D. going rogue. And then May's like, yeah, I've seen it. It's like, yeah, Coulson's done that. I mean, I think you can even say, like, arguably, like, he's very rogue in his own right. I mean, especially if you look at Captain Marvel, he's definitely rogue. But, I mean, he wasn't director then. Was he? I don't think he was. I think he was just an agent at that time, wasn't he? I don't remember. I still haven't. I need to rewatch Captain Marvel in that regard. But Fury's kind of like that. Just in his own. He's got that rogueness anyway. But I think even you can make the argument even more so when he was helping out Carol and everything. But regardless of all that, that is this interesting dynamic that's also brought up about the new team, like with their new roles and everything, because obviously initially May goes in there to talk to Cora about trying to convince her not to work with them. Because I also let it slip my mind to also talk about the fact is that we brought up a new conversation about, like, once again, we settled on the time travel rules of, like, because Cora's like, oh, that timeline you belong to doesn't exist anymore. So it's one of those things that, like, once the new timeline's created, the old timeline's deleted. There's no going back to it. Because, like, some time travel stuff will be, like, basically, even when you create a new timeline, they're parallel to it. Because even in-game, yes, its time travel rules are a little different, but there are parallel timelines. Even when a timeline branches off, it's parallel. The original timeline doesn't disappear because you're still there. Once again, that also breaks down the whole, because it also comes down to the theory of, like, my theory, and I think other people come up with this theory that the MCU has always been an alternate timeline because of the way Endgame ends. It shows that this has always been an alternate timeline where two Captain Americas have always existed. That's the whole thing. So, in particular, Steve Rogers, I should reference that because obviously, Sam and Bucky both, eventually take up the mantle in the S.H.I.E.L.D. at different points in the storyline, regardless of tangents and all that. Getting back to what I was trying to say, sorry. But the fact of the matter is, in this case, it seems like they're suggesting like the timelines disappeared, and it's like, well, there's been proof of that because it's like, yeah, there's been people saved because of all this, but obviously with Mac, people have lost their lives. But she's also, that's further proof of it. You remember your parents, yet they are died. You won't, obviously you have spent an entire life like knowing them. Like obviously the younger you will in this timeline will never know. And it's like, so it's proof that obviously we're living in a timeline because they're paradoxes. It's a paradox situation. But even Daisy kind of says, well, there's even more proof because Jia-Ying is dead and Jia-Ying hasn't had Daisy yet. So that's kind of an interesting thing of like, oh, so, and that also comes up later on. It's like, is there any way to get back to their timeline? Because this whole thing was about preserving their timeline, but it's like, because my whole thought too was like, if they went to 2020, if they went to what was their present, it would be a completely different present. They'd probably have completely different lives in that regard. I wonder would it work out in the same vein of like, once again, it just, when you nitpick time travel stuff, like when they go back, will it be like, oh, you've technically lived this entire life, you're just kind of jumping in the middle of it without any knowledge of it? For everyone else, it's like, oh, you've been here this entire time. The moment you plop back into that timeline, it's like, oh, time froze, and then you just plop back into that life. It's like, for you, you've never experienced this life, but for everyone else around you, it's like, what are you talking about? You've been here the entire time, you never went anywhere. It's arguments like that, or will it be the fact it's because they were all time traveling and the timeline shifted that they aren't they don't exist. Once again, it kind of, the whole thing once again creates like a paradox within itself. It's a whole thing, time travel is very heady stuff when you break it down like that. But yeah, this new timeline and everything. So, but initially May was trying to talk to her about the fact is of like not trusting someone like Nathaniel, because it's like, it's like, oh, are you all for killing people now? And for her, it's like, no, because for May, it's like, because I remember what it was. The whole conversation was about kind of like this in itself, all like this episode, once again, it's that number one time travel thing. I mean, it's come up in this episode. I mean, it's come up in this season, but it's coming up again of like, do you kill baby Hitler? It comes up in many different regards. I'm not making comparison with these other characters I'm making, but it's just that's the de facto position across all time travel stuff. Because, for example, I mean, if you only want to go down that route, it's the baby Thanos theory. If you want to just kind of keep it in a frame of Marvel and everything, of like, obviously Endgame once again kind of had its own time travel rules, so that wouldn't help their particular situation. But Cora knows about May because of what she did as a Calvary. It's like, what you did to that little girl, she was out of, like, obviously, like, she's coming at this from a position of like, oh, I was someone that was also going to be killed because I had a power that I couldn't control. And so, May has lived with that. Like, the fact of the matter is she's had to deal with it. She's had to confront it. So she's not going to be like held to that standard, of just kind of, not standard, but like you throwing that in her face. It's like, I've had to live with that for years. That's always been, her baggage, not baggage, but that's always been some of her trauma. So that, carrying that with her. So it's like, I've kind of dealt with it. So it's just kind of, but obviously like, then there's a whole situation where Cora ends up knocking out all the power because she kind of does lose a little bit control, but it all seems like it was all controlled because it was on purpose so that the power would go out so Sybil could get in. And I love that like May's reading off the stuff and then like Coulson's like, could you just not read that out loud? I forgot what she said. She said something and Coulson was like, wow, that's not menacing. That's not foreboding or ominous or whatever. But then just kind of like, I can read English, so you kind of don't have to. I was like, why are you getting all snippy, Coulson? Jeez. But nevertheless, I guess it's because of how dramatic and like tense those words are that Sybil's writing. That's like, I don't need you to kind of echo them out. We kind of get the gravitas of just reading them. I appreciated her reading them out, but regardless, the fact of the matter is. And, May's like, oh, can you read this code or whatever? And he's like, I don't think so. And then later on, he's talking like very like tech stuff. And it's like, wait, when have you, he's like, I've literally never said any of that before. It's like, he's like, I just know what I know. So it's like, oh, like, because I guess he's kind of finally leaning in more to the more machine side of things for himself. I thought that was kind of, fascinating in the long run. But Coulson has suggested like maybe getting Cora on their side because it's like you should talk to her, and she was suggesting like because this is Coulson's cup of tea of like talking to people because out of anyone you could say like Coulson and Mac are the ones who definitely have their more like heart on their sleeves. They act as kind of like typically like the conscience of the team, but also just kind of like as the leaders, they're the ones that kind of do all the talking. May, once again, that's always this whole emotional thing is something new to her because she's always had her emotions in check. Now she kind of doesn't have them all at all, and she doesn't necessarily have complete 100% control considering the fact that she's feeling other people's feelings, so it kind of throws her a little off whack. But Coulson's like, the fact of the matter is this is my superpower, so I got to focus on this. You've got yours. The fact of the matter is he's like, we aren't the same people we used to be, but the fact of the matter is you have to, step into this new role with your ability to kind of talk to Cora and convince her. It's like, you did it with Yo-Yo, you've done it with Daisy, you've done it with me, so kind of step in there and do that. And she talks to, she was going to talk to Cora, but she didn't get the chance because everything went tits up. The fact of the matter is the guys got out, but Yo-Yo was able to take him down. I was like, yo, once again, upgrade, baby, upgrade. No snapback. Having this snapback, dude, it's still wild. I'm like, we getting this in the final episodes of the final season. We getting that. I just think that's so crazy, but nevertheless, it's a situation where now it comes to the conversation about like, well, they want to fix things to get back to the original timeline. She's like, okay, kills one of the dudes, and it's like, all right, that's one step closer. You know what that also would mean? That would also mean killing Daniel Sosa, so he's not alive. I said Sosa just instead of Sousa. So that would kind of go back to the timeline you wanted and everything. It's like, once again, it's that whole conversation about like also the list of people. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. Yo-Yo was like, no, let's hear it out. They're like, what? No, Yo-Yo, that's not what we do. It's like, we might as well hear. And the first name on the list, Grant Ward, is like, even they had to hesitate. They were like, shit, that's a lot of good agents died because of Grant. It's like, ugh. But to be fair, Garrett's the reason why he ended up the way he did. But, Cora responds to that being like, if it wasn't for Garrett, Ward would actually be worse off without him, because I guess Sybil showed the possibilities. But I appreciate Coulson also throwing in, we've seen what Ward could have been. Even Daisy saw what Ward could have been in the framework, because he was a good guy in that. He wasn't Hydra, who he could have been, and that's the thing. So it's like, we can't dictate, like, yeah, he's a child right now, so you telling us to kill a child, but obviously throwing it at May. Oh, you're not above killing a child. That whole thing. So it's like that, and once again, that's why I kind of go back to that whole thing of like, because the difference is, we live in a world, kind of using the Hitler example, we live in a world where we only known Hitler the one way. Who he could have been, it doesn't matter, because this is the reality of who he was, the atrocities he committed. This is a situation where, once again, not trying to bring parallels to Ward and Hitler, but to be fair, Hitler and Nazis are connected Hydra, so it's even then, it's not the farthest example to use. But the fact of the matter is, when it was all said and done, though, you were able to see what he did in the world. And even then, he was conflicted. He had moments of trying to do the right thing and be a good guy. Mainly that was for Daisy, but still. That obviously leaves May conflicted, because let's not forget, I might have brought this up recently this season, but like, May and Ward were kind of a thing a little bit before him and Daisy happened. Well, once again, she was Sky back then. But regardless, the fact is that... So it's just like the evil that Ward did, but now they also have the perspective of the framework of like giving the good guidance, like giving people a good example to follow. You get the right person around them, they can become good people. He's like even suggesting that for Cora. It's like you get the right person in your corner, like having your sister in your corner rather than Nathaniel. Who knows who you could have been? I mean, look what happened to Jiaying. I don't know if Cora is aware of who her mom eventually became, but like Daisy became who she became, like not because of her mom, like because of the people around her. She becoming part of S.H.I.E.L.D. and everything, So, and also to be fair, she grew up not knowing she was an Inhuman, and so there's that whole angle to it. Like Jiaying was kind of a part of that for such a long time, so it's a little different in that regard. But it's an interesting and complicated conversation, once again, always when it comes to this time travel stuff. So May shows her, she's like, you know what? The fact of the matter is, Jiaying is actually here, and ends up showing her, because she was like, because Cora wants to basically show her mom, like, oh, my mom's going to see what I'm actually capable of. So it's like, okay, so you definitely don't know about your mom. So Cora sees her mom, and because like May's like, I'm going to do the one thing no one's ever done for you. What? Give you the truth. And, Cora tries to bring her mom back, because it's like, oh, she'll heal. It's like, no. Like, because once again, like I said, I brought it up last episode. It's been a while, because once again, this is season 2 stuff. But to my recollection, the reason why her powers stopped when her neck is snapped, well, in particular, her neck has to be destroyed beyond repair, I think. Because once again, I think it's like zombie rules, like her brain has to be disconnected, I think. Because once again, like, I just remember him snapping her neck, but I guess the way they talked about it, he kind of broke her spine, too. Daisy's dad. But regardless, tangents and all that, the fact of the matter is, it's like her neck is shattered. It's like, oh, this can only be done by quake. But it's like, no, your mom died protecting your sister from Nathaniel. It's like he's just manipulating you, which Cora's like, aren't you doing the same thing with your powers and everything, trying to manipulate me? But then like May fights back. It's like, oh, you going up against the wrong one. Don't think you're gonna be able to take down Melinda May like that. And superpowered or not, who do you think made Daisy the superstar agent she is? May, she's the one that trained her and everything. And when it was all said and done, though, like, even her dodging Cora's blast, but then, like, Garrett shows up and pops out of there with her. So that kind of sucks. And it's all literally ties in. Well, there's also well, kind of before we get to the other serious stuff, there is the stuff with them on on the Quinjet and everything, and I thought Zephyr. No, it is a Quinjet. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I do apologize. But I love the whole situation with Mac, Daniel, and Daisy, and him getting used to like floating and stuff like that. Then we get some really interesting conversations between Daisy and Mac about the whole thing, because it's like Enoch's last words, that even if they survive all this, this will be their last mission. And he's like, well, because the whole conversation is about, will we be able to get back to timeline OG? And so when it's all said and done, though, they got to conserve oxygen and everything. But it's like, Mac is like, maybe when it's all said and done, this is the end. And she's like, what? No, like, because this has been a part of their lives for so long. So just to walk away from it just seems weird. Just, are we going to just be those people like, oh, hey, I'm in town. Like, what's up? It's like we only see each other every once in a while. Like, rather than being around each other all the time, you know, because for Daisy, it's a scary thing, because for her, it's like, this is the only family she's ever known. You guys are my family. She doesn't want to lose that. And I think it's that complicated thing of like, things change, and change doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Like new horizons, you know, even this episode is called like Brand New Day, like, you know, because even Coulson says like, hey, May, it's a brand new day, like the new roles and everything. So it's like, who knows what that can look like them. I mean, once again, we don't know the circumstances of why this is going to be their final mission in every regard. Like I said, this could be a sad situation where they all end up in different time periods or whatever. We don't know. But when it is all said and done, though, there is a whole conversation, because, like, you know, Daisy's kind of looking at Daniel, and Matt's like, okay, you know, subtle. And she's like, what? It's like, you obviously kind of like him. And she's like, well, we kissed, but it was in a time loop. And he's like, that's actually meant. And he says what I said. I was like, oh, that's messed up, because he doesn't remember, but you do. And it's like, well, and I forgot what he had said, and she was like, what? And he was like, now I owe Yo-Yo $20 because of the whole bet and everything, and, you know? So, and I liked, you know, because I think, yeah, Mac even said himself, he was like, things won't be the same. But I think for him, it's the thing of like, even though these things won't, us, we may not be the same, like, dynamic that we are, like, now as a team. But it's like, we are family. We will always be family. Because for him, it's like, there's always phones. Like, we can always, like, yeah, we might not be around each other all the time anymore, but we will always be family. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing, especially kind of bringing that up at near the end of the season, not just the season, the series. But I thought it was a really, like, beautiful moment between Daniel and Mac. And Mac is like, what are your intentions with Daisy? And he's like, my intention? Like, what? He's like, he starts stepping into, like, the fatherly role, but also, like, you could also say, not just father, big brother role. Like, what are your intentions with my sister? What's your intentions with my daughter? Type of situation. And Daniel's just kind of, like, oblivious to it. And it's like she kind of has a thing for you. And it's like, Daniel's kind of like, what? Because it kind of caught him by surprise. He's like, she hasn't realized it yet, but eventually at some point in time, she will, you know, it will kind of come up to her. So it's like, he's like, actually, no, you're actually a really good guy, despite you being very, you know, straight ahead. He's like, wait, is that a bad thing? But the fact is that Mac is like, obviously she's been through a lot. She's been hurt a lot. And, well, because I think in particular, what I think he's referencing is the whole Lincoln situation, which I should also talk about. The fact is, that's what Cora was suggesting, like, oh, May could get her husband Andrew back, because there was that whole, who was it that he became? I forgot. He hunted other Inhumans. Like, I forgot the Inhuman. Wasn't it Lash? Wasn't that his name? That Inhuman that Andrew ended up becoming. But it's like, Lincoln, even throwing in Rosalind for Coulson, because let's not forget that was direct. Well, because I guess it's also because because Ward became Hive and ended up killing Andrew. He also, as Hive, well, that led to the whole Lincoln situation dying, and that also led to, well, when Grant was just Grant before he'd even become Hive, he had killed Rosalind. So kind of bringing that all up. But it's like, I think that's always like, because I think I thought about it, but I never brought it up during the recordings. Daisy hasn't been in a relationship since Lincoln, and in the grand scheme of the show, that was season 3, you know. So, and she's there. I don't, like, it took her a long time to finally kind of like get past that. Like, not necessarily get past it, but still kind of, you know, dealing with that. So he's like, I just don't want her to get hurt again. He's like, I would never hurt her. And he's like, good. Because he's like, because Mac was saying some threatening stuff. He's like, are you threatening? He's like, no, we are, because we have the entire team will go to bat for Daisy. So if you hurt her, we will hurt you. It's, oh, you won't believe the access to technology we have. He's like, I get it. But I would never hurt Daisy. And he's like, good. He's like, man, can you even think about it? A Man Out of Time and Quake? Straight out of something out of the comic book. And he's like, wait, Quake? I was like, oh, this is your first time hearing about her nickname? And he's like, oh yeah, that's like her, superhero name. He's like, Quake, and they're laughing about it. I even love later on, he's like, okay, sure thing, Quake. And she's like, wait, I'm sorry, what? He's like, Quake, that's your name, right? Quake. And he's poking fun at it. And to me, this is going to be me going on a little bit of a diatribe, but I think it's actually kind of an interesting thing, because not too many people even the Marvel TV shows where we have set up right now have superhero names. That's mainly set for like the movies, but like on like the lower levels, like in a sense of like I feel weird always saying lower level just because of but regardless, like Daisy's granted, there have been other people. God, I forgot Bobby's. What isn't her nickname Mockingjay? Wasn't that her moniker? But it was like Daisy's the only one that really actually has like a superhero name. Because you can make the argument about Yo-Yo, but that's more of a nickname because she bounces back. Bounces back is what I was thinking earlier. Because I said snapback, I was like, I knew that didn't sound right. It's bounce back. I was thinking about it. Regardless. But she's the only one, and not even just in this show, just in like even all the Marvel TV shows in general. It kind of gets you like all like. Totality, like looking at everything in totality, just because this kind of the end of just this Marvel TV era anyway. But even then, like Matt got his name as Daredevil because, well, the news called him Daredevil, much like Daisy with Quake, because she got the name Quake in between that like time skip period between like the end of 3 and season 3 and season 4. But like Jessica goes by the name Jessica Jones. She doesn't have a superhero name. Luke Cage, he changed his name to be so on and so forth. Like he changed his name. Danny isn't necessarily, he's the Iron Fist, but that's also because that's a legacy thing. Like he's one of many, like it's a thing, it's the power, it's the position of being the Iron Fist. So it's a little bit of a different. Frank being the Punisher, that's not necessarily him. He kind of leans into it sometimes, but even then. Cloak and Dagger, Ty and Tandy never referred to themselves as Cloak and Dagger. If I'm not, I could be mistaken. I don't think they've ever really called themselves that. I think the same thing applies to the Runaways. I think because I think I looked it up like sometime after the show had ended. They have monikers in the comic books that I don't think they ever really came up in the TV show. I think there might have been winks and nods to that in the TV show. Because interestingly enough, Alex is the only one amongst the Runaways who doesn't have a nickname. There's actually kind of significance into what his story is as to why that kind of is. And it's a really fascinating aspect. I just thought it was kind of interesting. But regardless, it's just one of those things where it's just like in all of that, like I was just thinking about like, oh, her being the only one having a superhero name. So there's that. At the same time, there's everything with Nathaniel trying to get the information out of Simmons' head. But anytime he's going inside her head, he's just seeing flashbacks to the show. And I was like, oh, these moments here and there between Fitz and Simmons over the years. But he can't get it out because he's like, how are you blocking me? But then like Deke ended up getting captured and being tortured. I even love Deke being like, nah, like I forgot like he was like, this is nothing. This guy ain't got anything. It's like, no, he's got something there, but I'm okay. But then like Nathaniel figures out about like, okay, like I see this device in you, but I can't get it out. He's like, well, I'll just have to push deeper and deeper until I find out the truth. And he goes deeper, and this is actually interesting. This is our first episode getting a peek at Fitz. It's a flashback, but it's like Fitz in the sense of it actually is Fitz because it's a new scene. But the fact of the matter is, it's the whole conversation about like, because they're building the time machine and everything. And then Fitz is suggesting, why don't we just kind of, because time is kind of irrelevant when you have a time machine, why don't we just kind of basically take time for ourselves? Because it's understandable, because so much has happened, something that always happens, that always got in their way. Like, destiny would always pull them apart regardless of everything, no matter what happened. So it's like, I mean, hell, let's not forget, Fitz technically died. It was a different version of him from a different time. Like, that's a whole paradox situation. But even then, it's like, there's always something. So like, why not take time for ourselves? Because we don't know how much time we have, and we don't know when. Putting aside the whole like the world is ending thing. And once again, that's why Matt bringing that up is so interesting too. Of just us kind of putting aside all the superhero business. I think it's kind of interesting. But the deeper and deeper Nathaniel went trying to find out where Fitz was, like he ends up in this white room, and there's a conversation where it's like, she's like, I don't want to forget, but he's like, it's the only way, But she's like, all the guilt I'll feel about it. It's like, because Diane it's Diana, the device in her. It's like, it's not. I'm wondering, is it actually like Fitz's I don't know what it is. Like, I don't think Fitz is alive anymore. Either he died and like he had to be like turned into like an AI system. Like he is like a program or something. Like the real Fitz is gone, long since dead, and all that exists to him is like almost like code or something. That's what I'm wondering. I've kind of got that inkling because even Simmons is starting to get to that point. She's wondering if Fitz is actually still alive. I mean, because now it's also a situation, because this is a different timeline and paradoxes are involved, like that explains why Deke's alive right now, so I mean, same thing for like, Daisy in that regard, paradoxing it all up all over the place with the S.H.I.E.L.D. But obviously Nathaniel's not too happy because things aren't going the way he wants them to. But then like Simmons comes back, and she's like, oh, are you okay? And he's like, are you okay? He didn't look too happy. I guess he didn't find Fitz. And she's like, who's Fitz? I'm like, oh shit. Because she even said it herself, like Fitz will go deeper. So I'm thinking it's supposed to imply like defective matter is if you try scratching for that information, like the system is made to kind of push it deeper and deeper to the point you can't find Fitz. So I think to the point it erased Fitz in general from her memory. Because even then, you see at one point in time, she's by herself and she's like, don't forget, please don't forget, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. Like, I think it was her reminding herself before she got the device in her about what it was she wasn't supposed to forget. That's why that emotional reaction happened the way it did, like during the time loop and everything. It's like, I'm so curious, like what that is specifically. I mean, we'll probably definitely get that information soon enough. But I'm like, what is that? Because I would also explain why they kind of going about their way of making it so that Fitz hasn't literally. This is the first time we've seen any Fitz. The flashbacks was the first Fitz the entire season. It's kind of crazy. It's so interesting that some other shows are kind of doing that, because like the 100, it's because it's the same night and everything. It's kind of doing a similar thing, because there's certain characters that are like super not in this season at all that you're like, wow, avoiding spoilers and stuff like that. But I'm like, oh, like we only got a couple episodes left, and this character hasn't even really popped up maybe like once or twice the entire season, So there's that. It's kind of something in that similar vein, but that's kind of worrying. Another interesting thing, though, I just kind of an acting standpoint, I think it's kind of the actress who like she's one of the actresses that actors like Nathaniel was talking to on the ship and everything. That's, if I remember correctly, she was in Black Lightning. She played, I think her character was it Major? God, I'm blanking on it. Major Gray, I want to say her name was. I was like, holy shit. Once again, I always think that's interesting when like, because I even talked about it like in this, like the actress who plays Piper was in The Walking Dead as well, if I'm not mistaken, because I think she was from Oceanside, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just, it's just like bouncing around like, oh, you were in this comic book property, you're in this comic book property. It's just, it's interesting like that. But aside from all of that, Nathaniel's just not in a good mood because things are kind of going like he's all about chaos, but it's like the guy was like, oh sir, and he was like, what did I tell you about calling me sir? Even though he was talking about there not being any structure, he's like, even though there's no structure, he's talking about the structure of things. And even the lady who plays Major Gray or whatever from Black Lightning was kind of like, even she was almost like I think they're having reservations about like, oh, you're not the most stable individual. Regardless, the fact is, then like ships come out of nowhere. I'm like, what the hell was that? Because part of me was wondering if that was the Confederacy, all those alien like groups we met back in season 5. I thought that was what that was about. That's also a point I meant to bring up about Yo-Yo. I do apologize, I'm all over the place, but it's a point I thought was kind of interesting, because Yo-Yo was the one that was like, oh, we need to let's hear who she wants, who Cora wants to take out, because let's not forget, Yo-Yo was in that exact same situation when it's like, oh, saving the future, saving this planet from being cracked open, from quaking. She thought it was Ruby, so she slit Ruby's throat. Once again, that's also been something she's talked about before. The fact is that she has a tendency to be a little impatient, kind of jump the gun. Like, obviously, that's just kind of been an aspect in her character, like that's a whole thing. But it kind of gets brought up in that moment, and it's just like it's almost befitting that her, because of that situation back in season 5, that it would kind of come back up in this regard, because she would be all about that, because she was in that circumstance of, to save the world, I'm willing to kind of go down the lane that no one else is willing to. I mean, Deke probably would too, because I mean he straight up killed Freddy, so that's not too much of a surprise in that regard. But it turns out the Chronocoms were told years ago the show appeared. Now they've showed up, and now they're destroying every S.H.I.E.L.D. base. This is their way to wipe out S.H.I.E.L.D. once and for all, to keep them out of their way of creating what they're trying to create. Once again, you're just a means to an end, but I think Nathaniel doesn't care, just because all the chaos that'll reign, whether I'll be here or not, or whether he thinks he's going to be alive long enough to enjoy it, whatever the case may be. Cora's on the ship now, and she's looking at him, and when he's touching her face and everything, it's like, oh, these very hands quaked my mom and just shattered her neck. So it's like, and then they're kissing and everything, so it's like, oh, that's got to leave you with conflicted feelings and stuff like that. So I think what May said did hit a nerve. The question then becomes like, well, what is Cora going to do in the grand scheme of things, especially because they do have a full-blown alien invasion of their own. I mean, granted, this one first time, but still. So it's going to be interesting, because obviously Mac, Daisy, and Daniel are not too far away, but they're kind of watching this while everyone back on Earth is watching like all the ships. I'm not all the ship, but all these S.H.I.E.L.D. buildings get destroyed. So it's like, where do we go from here? I'm very interested to see. Jesus, I realized how long I've been talking. I did not realize it was that damn long. Jeez. Sorry. I also wanted to quickly note, because I didn't watch this episode live. I ended up watching it on Hulu, so I wasn't sure. So I looked it up, and there's promotional stuff for the series finale. I haven't watched it, but I was curious whether they were going to double up on episodes. It seems like they are. Next week's episode will be episodes 12 and 13, 13 being the series finale. So it's going to be back-to-back episodes next week, and I cannot wait. I'm glad they're not making us wait like another week to see everything. Oh, well, another week after, next week. But I am very, very, very interested to ultimately see how they wrap up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's going to be a wild ride, I can only assume. So I'm interested to see what the series finale has in store for us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.